gas tax revenue.
Good morning, Stephen Keck, Chief Budget Officer for Caltrans, and I'm having a handout delivered to go along with my presentation. I was asked to give a brief overview of state taxes on gasoline today. Gasoline taxes have been in place in California since 1923, and transportation funding as a whole is quite complex. So I'm going to focus just on gasoline today. We have gasoline and diesel. I'm going to focus just on gasoline to be as brief as possible. So there are currently two different per gallon taxes on gasoline. We call those excise taxes. There's a base excise tax and a price-based excise tax. This is briefly explained in your agenda, but I'm going to elaborate just a little bit. The base excise tax was put into place in 1923, and when it was put into place, it was 2 cents a gallon. It has been increased several times since then, and it's currently 18 cents a gallon. The price-based excise tax is a replacement for the sales tax on gasoline. Sales tax had been collected on gasoline since 1971, and in 2000 it was dedicated to transportation purposes. In 2010, the state sales tax was replaced with the price-based excise tax in what we call the fuel tax swap. So there are specific uses for each of the two taxes. The price-based excise tax is first used to pay for debt service on transportation bonds, or rather to backfill weight fees, which are used to pay for debt service on transportation bonds. And then the balance is split 44% to local transportation, 44% to the State Transportation Improvement Program, and 12% for highway rehabilitation. And the base 18 cents is used for a variety of uses, but the important point about the base 18 cents is it is the only state source of revenue that can be used to run the department and to maintain and operate the state highway system. In the handout that I passed around, the very first chart shows the excise taxes in nominal value along the bottom in green column, starting at 2 cents in 1923 and increasing to 18 cents today. The important part about this graph, though, is the purple line, which you'll see undulating across, which is the excise tax adjusted for inflation. Since 1923, it's gone up and down quite a bit, but most notably down in the mid-70s with the hyperinflation we had in the 70s. So this chart shows a couple of things. The first is since the gas tax was increased to its current rate in 1994, we've lost about 40% of the buying power of that tax to inflation. The second thing that it shows, that shows a lot of things, but another important point is in 1964, which is now 50 years ago, the gas tax was 7 cents per gallon. 7 cents is less than half of what it is today, but the buying power was 4.5 times of what it is today. So we've lost quite a bit to inflation over that time. I'll skip ahead to the next chart because I know we want to be brief today. The next chart is looking into the future. As we look to the future, we have federal fuel economy standards that are urging fuel economy in a 55 mile to the gallon range by 2030. Because the taxes we collect are based on fuel consumed, this will have a direct impact on transportation funding. If fuel mileage never changed, then the amount of revenue that we collect would change with VMT. It would go up or it would go down with vehicle miles traveled. There would be no difference in the rate. But because we're going to see more fuel-efficient vehicles, we have this little orange line on here with a little, I'm going to say that's a Prius, getting more and more gas mileage. And because they use less and less fuel to drive the same amount of miles, we're going to get less revenue. And as a brief case study on how that's going to impact or how soon we can expect to see changes, in the European Union in 2001, the average fuel economy of a car sold there was 35 miles to the gallon, which is what it is in California today. In 2011, 10 years later, the average fuel economy was 42 miles to the gallon, with most of their vehicles exceeding 50 miles to the gallon on the highways. So there's no reason to believe that our own CAFE standards can't come very close to that, and we expect to see impacts pretty soon. In fact, we're already starting to see impacts from increased fuel economy. And with that brief glimpse into the future, I'll stop there and be happy to answer any questions.
Questions? Well, I'm not seeing any. The obvious question is then where do we go from here, and what planning is taking place to address that issue?
So in the California Transportation Agency's California Transportation Infrastructure Priorities report that came out in February, the agency had recommended exploring a different revenue option, sometimes called a road usage charge or a mileage-based user fee. We are currently in the beginning processes of looking into and exploring and adding to the research that's already out there in this kind of fee system. It is in place permanently in Oregon for a fairly limited pool of vehicles, but it's something that we're looking at. No plans to immediately switch over to anything in the near future, but this is something that we're going to begin looking into.
Thank you. If there's no questions, we'll move on to issue 12, understanding that the recommendation is also hold open on issue 11.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Malcolm Doherty, Caltrans Director. I'll address issue number 12. Caltrans is requesting the early repayment of $337 million in outstanding general fund loans in fiscal year 2014-2015. Funds will be immediately available for capital and pavement projects in the State Highway Operation Protection Program, also known as the SHOP program, pavement projects in the highway maintenance areas, including funding for local streets and roads, and traffic management systems projects. These state and local highway projects will aid in the maintenance, preservation, restoration, mobility, and operational efficiency throughout the state. Addressing distressed pavement and intelligent transportation system elements are priorities for the department. The projects selected are already programmed in outer years of the SHOP plan, and with these additional funds, we would be accelerating the delivery of those projects. The loan repayment is just a first step in addressing our maintenance needs outlined in the California's 5-year infrastructure plan and is available due to the state's improving fiscal health. The 5-year infrastructure plan does include a total of $27.4 billion for transportation. The California Transportation Infrastructure Priorities Group, the CTIP work group, is addressing this very question for long-term sustainable funding for our transportation priorities. There are significant deferred maintenance needs at both the state and the local level, and the governor's proposal recognizes this and provides funding for both.
So, Mr. Doherty, how far did you want to add? It looks like you're ready to say something.
Jessica Peters with the Legislative Analyst's Office. We would just recommend to you that you have Caltrans actually consider potentially a different mix of how they're using the funds provided from the loan repayment. We think generally, repaying the loan early is a reasonable step that can allow projects to move forward sooner than would otherwise be the case. However, the mix of projects and the way that the administration proposes to spend the funds might not be the most cost effective. To point out, for example, of all of the $337 million proposed, only $27 million of that would actually go to highway maintenance, which is one of the most cost-effective things that Caltrans can do in order to keep the state highways in good condition. And even there, that $27 million would be directed only to rural areas of the state, meaning that there wouldn't be any maintenance happening on the state's urban highways that carry the highest traffic volumes. In addition, in order to address that issue, we think that Caltrans should take a look at the $27 million plus $110 million that they would propose to put into the SHOP program for pavement, and to, instead of just sort of setting those two different buckets the way that they have, to use their new pavement management system. The department procured this new system and collected a lot of data, was approved by the legislature in past years, and they spent $30 million developing this new system. And the system will actually allow them to choose the most cost-effective projects and whether or not to put the money into maintenance or the SHOP program. And we think that you should direct them to go back and use that system. It was a wise investment that was made previously, and we think that they should use that to select the projects for the loan repayment. In addition, we think that you just may want to consider the money for the traffic management systems and the money provided to cities and counties, and just sort of weigh your options there. It might be a better step for for the legislature to direct those funds to state highway maintenance, given that the state does have so many needs on pavement and bridge maintenance.
Thank you. Whose handout is this? Mine. Ah, okay, thank you. All right. Perhaps I'll give you an opportunity, Mr. Doherty, to respond to the LAO's comments. While you're doing that, my question was going to be in the 5-year, given the 5-year infrastructure plan, how far along does this take us?
To begin, again, Malcolm Doherty, Caltrans Director, to begin in responding to some of the LAO's comments, and I appreciate her comments. The PAVEM system, to begin with, is going to be a very useful tool to us. We see it as a new tool that will help us make wiser decisions and investment in pavement strategies going forward. Today, we track very closely the condition of all our pavement, whether it's in green, yellow, or red condition, and try to invest our funds wisely in addressing that. The PAVEM system is just up and running now and is in the data collections posture. You need multiple data set points to be able to utilize that to its fullest extent. We certainly are utilizing it as we speak today, but the current project prioritization also includes a number of processes such as the International Ride Index, the district pavement condition reports, the pavement condition priority matrix, and the maintenance service level criteria. So we fully intend on using the PAVEM system in the future as we have more data set points for it to help us drive decision making. Operational improvements as well as preservation of the system are very high priorities for us. We need to maximize the benefit that we have already invested in, and those operational improvements will have condition as well as safety benefits. Regarding investments in preventative maintenance, again, we do think this is an augmentation to investment in preventative maintenance. This is not the sole amount being invested in preventative maintenance strategies. It is a very cost-effective way to invest in pavement, and we do think that this is a good mix of funds to be investing in all the different pavement conditions that we have to be able to progress in managing our pavement and doing good asset management. With that, if you could repeat your question, I'll try to address your specific one.
You referred to the governor's 5-year infrastructure plan, and I'm just trying to get a sense of how far along we will be as of this budget year.
This is a beginning step of the investment over that 5-year needs. All the funding for those 5-year needs is not necessarily identified as of yet. We are making progress and improving over the last couple of years, and we wholeheartedly hope to be able to continue to make progress in improving the condition of our infrastructure. As an example, our pavement health over the last 3 years has gone from 26% distressed to 16% distressed. Our overall goal is 10%. And we are still looking for the appropriate funding to be able to achieve that goal by 2023.
Does the 5-year infrastructure plan call out a certain amount of improvement for year 1?
I would have to go back and look at the specific year call-outs for what is in the infrastructure plan.
And if you could get that information to us, that would be great. In addition, again, how far along this budget takes us to meeting that year 1 goal.
Okay.
Ms. Campos, we're going to hear about your handout
Thank you.
now.
Well, actually, because I'm not all over California, but I'm clearly in my area, I had to use some examples to what I want to talk about, the $27 million for highway maintenance. And the best place is to use examples right in your backyard, but look at this from a bigger lens when we talk about the state of California. I know I had brought this up a while back about particular graffiti in my community. I have to imagine that this is not just happening in my community, it's happening all across the state of California. And I know that if you look at one of the areas that I had expressed concern about is the signs, knowing that these 2 signs that I'm using as examples are still visible of what the exits are and how long it will take you. But my question to you is, and then the other one is the 17, examples of graffiti along sound walls throughout San Jose, and I'm sure continuing as you go into Morgan Hill and Gilroy. My question to you, as you look at the bigger picture of addressing these blight issues and safety issues across California's highways, will some of this money be used towards that? And then the other question, because I had a lot of constituents across California come in on one day last week asking me about this particular question, and I said that it was timely since we were going to be coming before the committee, that you were going to be coming before the committee around Caltrans issues, is there a way of partnering with cities, because some cities have infrastructure to be able to address this, some cities don't, some cities outsource, which I don't think is the best thing to do, but I can't control what happens on local government. Is there a mechanism? Have we looked at that? Is there a way to do it? So those are my questions around this particular issue.
Thank you, Assembly Member. Certainly, the issues and challenges that you bring to light here when it comes to graffiti are statewide issues. They are a huge resource drain for us and a huge challenge that we try to do the best that we possibly can to keep up with. The funds that are identified in this package are specific for projects, either pavement projects or ITS element projects or preventative maintenance projects, and that's what's in the highway maintenance, the HM program, are specific for pavement projects. When we prioritize the other operating expenses and the activities that we do, we first try to address all the safety issues. The signals are working, the signs, the directional signs, stop signs are up, the guardrail and things of that nature are in place. Then we go to the potholes and the bridges and those maintenance, and then we get to some of the aesthetic issues. Certainly, if graffiti was causing a safety issue or the graffiti was offensive in nature, we would try to address that in a very short amount of time. And then after that, we are prioritizing the remaining amount of our resources for aesthetic type items such as graffiti, litter and weeds, and those types of things. We are doing the best that we possibly can with the resources we have to try to address those. I think that we were as responsive as we tried, as we could
You did a great job,
in
by
some
the
of the
way.
other items, and we'll continue to try to do that. As far as partnering with cities, there are lots of opportunities to partner with cities. In prior positions that I have had working in the district, I've had interagency agreements with cities and counties to be able to share resources to address some of the litter, graffiti, and other issues that were aesthetic issues that were very important to the local community, because those aesthetic issues are very important to those communities, and there are opportunities to enter into maintenance agreements and collaborate resources to try to address some of those things. Now, certainly, especially with the picture that you represent, it would be hard to partner with a city to be able to go over live traffic and address graffiti issues on there. Those would be resources we would have to cover in doing traffic control and using lift equipment and things like that. But there are other opportunities for partnering with cities that we can explore.
Can you define safety issue for me from your perspective in Caltrans? Because when you said safety issues, some of this graffiti, and probably internally you don't have someone that can read this, there is a safety issue. So define safety issue for me from your perspective as an agency.
Sure, thank you. Certainly, any signal operations and guardrail and safety elements that we have out there would certainly fall into the safety category. There's also conditions of the facilities and potholes that would fall into the safety category. There also is some aesthetic issues when it comes to either fire danger or sight distance when it comes to weeds, as well as graffiti that can be covering up directional signs that have to be addressed, and they would be in the safety category. Not all graffiti. You go to the next page, on page 3 of 18, it's graffiti on a sound wall. Certainly an issue that needs to be addressed, not necessarily a safety issue, an aesthetic issue and a community pride issue that we would want to try to address. So that's how I would differentiate between some of the safety aspects and aesthetic issues when it comes to graffiti.
Okay. Then you talked about safety. So I know that a lot of communities are experiencing copper theft. And we know that the lighting on a lot of these freeways is not there because of copper theft. Would this fall into that category as well?
It
when
would.
you talk about lighting and
It would, not only from a lighting standpoint. Some of our irrigation as well as stop signs have suffered from copper theft. In one area in your district, we've experienced as much as 19,000 feet of copper theft in a short amount of time, and it is another huge resource drain to try to replace that, and it's an enormous challenge. We've experimented quite a bit with preventative measures to prevent them from trying to steal copper, but we still seem to be behind the 8 ball with that. And that also would be an area that we would prioritize as a safety issue to try to be resolved. In some cases, as quickly as we replace it, it gets stolen again.
So is there another alternative to the copper?
There are, but there are other problems with some of the different alternatives, and we're exploring different options as to how to deal with that. There are some things we can do out in the field, like direct burial, so it's not real easy to pull out. There's different materials that you can try to use, and there's also things that we can do to try to mark our wire such that it cannot be sold. PG&E marks their wire with a PG&E stamp. That may be an expensive measure for us, but it may be worthwhile for us to undertake that measure such that we would prevent the market for the wire that they were stealing from us. I think we're exploring all options to try to prevent this. We have not necessarily solved that puzzle, but it is a huge problem, and there are some safety implications of it.
Yeah, well, when lightning has been, when it's been dark for 5 months, it definitely is a safety issue for the community. The other thing that, just because we know that we're in a drought period, and first of all, the fact that we've widened 101 where Tully's at and up by Hellier, a phenomenal project. It has really alleviated a lot of the traffic congestion right around there. But one of the things that I did notice going out there, and this was around the time that the governor declared that the state was in a drought state. I'm not sure, are there different types of grasses that are being used that are water resistant, or because there's grass there, and I just thought that was kind of not timely to have grass, huge patches of grass. So is there a type of grass that requires less water and no mowing? And
so we are not typically planning grass as a landscape strategy. I'm guessing, and I'm not familiar with this particular project, I'm guessing it was an erosion control strategy that was placed on top of bare dirt to be able to accomplish erosion control in that location. What we are doing, and we have shifted our landscape strategies over the years to drought-resistant, low water usage type landscape.
I see that in other communities, so I thought this was kind of out of the ordinary and wanted to understand from your perspective.
So this is probably erosion control that was originally put down, and that's why it would be that green color. And then grass, we tend to irrigate our landscape and not so much our grass, and that's why the grass will go dormant or go brown in the dry seasons. We have taken an initiative to reduce the amount of irrigation to our landscape by 50% until we're through this drought period. We're going to take several strategies to try to do that, use non-potable water, as well as smart irrigation systems. We are also trying to address construction projects that require water and potentially defer landscape projects until a year that we can, or we're outside the drought. So we are looking at our existing landscape as well as future landscape. Now, some landscape was already committed. We do have to do erosion control or we'll have other problems. But if we are able to defer that landscape, we may defer it till next spring, hoping that we're out of a drought situation then, and of course we would reassess. But I think that from a landscape strategy overall, we are trying to implement as drought-resistant a landscape strategy in every part of the state as we possibly can. A majority of our irrigation water is used in Southern California.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. So we are going to take public comment, and then I should ask Mr. Doherty, and this is on the last three items, items 10, 11, and 12. There's a recommendation, Mr. Doherty, to hold open on the infrastructure proposal, but to ask you to come back with approximately $1 billion of transportation maintenance STIP and SHOP projects for consideration in the 2015 and 16 budget process. So we have a shelf full of projects that are ready to go should funding be available.
I can acknowledge that request, and we'll work with your staff to try to respond to that request.
Thank you. So why don't we hear from the public, and then I'll entertain a motion on that.
Mr. Chairman, members, Bob Naylor representing Census Networks and also the ITS California, supporting the $100 million for traffic management systems. This is about using our existing facilities more efficiently, and U.S. DOT studies have shown a high degree of cost effectiveness in travel time savings, fuel savings, and greenhouse gas reductions.
Mike Robeson on behalf of Caltrain. On item 10, the $50 million competitive grant for rail modernization, we're in support of that. Just I already mentioned the greenhouse gas reductions that electrification of the Caltrain will have. I just also want to add that the electrification project in Caltrain will reduce vehicle miles by about 235,000 miles annually, and will incredibly improve the economic output in the region, taking vehicles off the highways and moving people around. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Matt Robinson today on behalf of the Solano Transportation Authority. I'd like to comment quickly on the rail modernization program that's been proposed by the administration. First, I'd like to thank Undersecretary Annis and Secretary Brian Kelly for putting up a fight for rail programs throughout the state and getting this piece included in the budget. That being said, we'd like to continue to work with the administration on the distribution of these funds in the hopes that we might be able to provide a little more predictability to our rail operators throughout the state. And I think it goes without saying, but I'm going to say it anyway, $50 million isn't very much, and we'd like to see this pot grown by quite a bit in order to do some real good. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. My name is Tom Tietz. I'm the Executive Director of the California-Nevada Cement Association. I'd like to offer two concepts for the committee to consider regarding the funding for Caltrans. One is the use of a policy called alternate design, alternate bid, one that's used in other states to maximize funding so that greater competition occurs and more value is brought to the state. I also wanted to mention that our organization supports Caltrans in their efforts to maximize the reduction of greenhouse gases by the economical use of cap-and-trade dollars. And the way that we envision that happening is through what we've seen happen in research from the University of California and MIT and others, which shows that we could use our most visible public asset, our highways, to actually become more fuel efficient and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So what we would like to see is that this sort of a concept be considered, both in the rehabilitation of existing roadways and new ones, and bring overall value to the state. I want to mention that these ideas aren't new or revolutionary. Other states are using alternate design, alternate bid to achieve cost savings, and there's examples within California. I'll give one as an example in the Inland Empire, where there's the I-10 there, built in 1947, is still carrying 200,000 vehicles per day and has never needed resurfacing. So we'd be happy to provide more information on things like alternate design, alternate bid, pavement vehicle interaction, and so forth. Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members. Mark Watts. I have two comments. First, on behalf of Riverside County Transportation Commission, as you go through your examination under rail modernization of the trailer bill language, which as of today is suitable for our purposes, we are going to be bringing online an extension of an intercity rail corridor. We want to make sure that the trailer bill language that relates to rail modernization doesn't simply pull some other formula out and not recognize new and emerging corridors. I just want to put that into play, and we'll be watching and we'll provide more specific information if we see a change in that. And the other is just simply on the whole issue of the excise tax and transportation funding. I represent a coalition of contractors and labor. We tried to get something going through the initiative process and finally had to pull that earlier this year. To put this into perspective, you had plenty of data from the department on how the purchasing power and the effect of that all has had on the excise tax. A measure we look at is the look-ahead list at Caltrans. It looks ahead about a year in terms of contract volume that will be coming out the door. Several years ago, it was in excess of $3 billion. And if you look at it today, it's about $1 billion. And that's a definite drop in job opportunities for our members. So I just want to bring that to your attention and encourage you as you finish up your budget process this year that we think about perhaps, in addition to developing a plan for the department, see if there's some way to squeeze some funding out for transportation investment in the budget year. Thank you very much.
Good morning. Kiana Buss on behalf of the California State Association of Counties, here to ask your consideration of two requests within the transportation budget. To provide some brief context for those requests, I'd first like to highlight the needs, infrastructure needs currently facing the local street and road system. Over the next 10 years, our most recent analysis of the local street and road system has identified an $82 billion funding shortfall for just the maintenance of the existing local street and road system. We believe this compares similarly to the needs on the state system. Overall, the state as a whole for its multimodal system is facing significant funding needs. Cities and counties use pavement management systems for a cost-effective project selection process at the local level, guaranteeing effective investment in the city, street, and county road system. And so with that in mind, we are asking for your consideration of an alternative proposal to the $337 million early HUDA loan repayment. As the analysis has reflected and you have discussed, the governor proposes 30% of those funds to the local street and road system, to cities and counties for maintenance on that system, and 70% for the state highway system. We are asking that this loan repayment reflect the transportation tax swap allocation formula that was agreed to in 2010 by the legislature, which would provide 44% to cities and counties and 56% to the state highway system. And we believe we are ready and able to put that money to good use. Additionally, as the analysis noted, cities and counties are requesting that this committee consider putting a sunset on the transfer of approximately $140 million to the general fund that has been diverted from the transportation tax swap. This committee in 2012 approved such a sunset, but the governor was opposed to it at this time, so we are asking for your reconsideration of that effort to return those monies to transportation where they were intended to be spent. Obviously, we've heard a lot about the purchasing power of the gas tax today and the needs on both systems, so we would respectfully request your consideration of that as well. Thank you.
Julian DeVos with the Urban Counties Caucus, also here to support CSAC's comments that were just made by Ms. Buss. We support and appreciate the early repayment of the HUDA, but we are requesting that that allocation formula more closely mirror the agreement we made in 2010 with the tax swap. Also asking for a statutory fix on the funds from the off-highway account, which have been being diverted, and we're just asking for a sunset date to be put in place so that could stop and we could invest this at the local level to create more jobs and help the maintenance of our local streets and roads. Thank you.
Good afternoon, members. Jeannie Wardwaller. I'm with the Safe Routes to School National Partnership. We worked closely with your committee staff and also with the Transportation Agency, the CTC, and Caltrans, as well as other active transportation stakeholders over the last year on the active transportation program. We appreciate all that hard work and especially ensuring that Safe Routes to School projects have dedicated funding through that program. We appreciate the $9 million of loan repayment funds that are from the bicycle transportation account and the pedestrian safety account, and having that go back to the active transportation program. But it's critical to both increase the funding for this program overall and ensure that we continue to fund Safe Routes to Schools. As we've developed the ATP to focus state efforts more on walking and bicycling, the California Household Travel Survey showed that walking and biking rates have doubled in the state since 2000 to nearly 20% of mode share. This data indicates huge demand for these funds and for greater travel options. We've also been helping Caltrans do their outreach for the upcoming call for projects. We were actually in San Jose last week doing a workshop, and we've had overwhelming response from local agencies for this funds. So as we talk about funding for maintenance and preservation as well, those projects are the are the best and cheapest opportunities to implement complete streets, as long as they are considered and designed into the projects from the beginning. Not doing that is a missed opportunity. to design for all modes and requires more expensive design changes later, for funding dedicated to maintenance and preservation, such as those going to the SHOP program in this item, considering safety and designing for all users should be required for all projects. Thank you.
Joshua Stark with Transform, an organization that works for equitable and sustainable land use and transportation policies. Thank you for holding this hearing today. I'll keep my comments to item 10 on rail modernization. Transform is a member of the 535 Coalition and also a member of the Sustainable Communities for All Coalition, two groups working to ensure the equitable use of cap-and-trade revenues. And in that context, Transform would like to see the rail modernization portion be expanded to be considered a transit modernization program rather than merely rail modernization, to include the needs for communities and for that seamless transportation infrastructure that Secretary Kelly has so eloquently stated on a number of occasions. We fully agree with that, and we would like to see things such as bus rapid transit and transit pass eligibility within this pot of money. We feel that it will help create that seamless transportation infrastructure. Also to give a similar or support to the Safe Routes to School National Partnerships comments. Thank you.
And Joshua Shaw for the California Transit Association on item number 10, the Rail Mod program. We represent all 12 of the local, or in some cases regional, JPA authorities that run all of the state's rail, passenger rail transit systems at this point. We actually, as you just heard, some rail agencies support the governor's program as is. They like the competitive nature, think they will compete well. Other agencies would prefer a more predictable, formularized approach so that we can get to things like the Undersecretary mentioned, expansion. Those require more dollars and more predictability. So we're agnostic right now on the structure, but the one thing all of our rail operators agree on is $50 million does not go very far. We know, the governor knows that, we know this, the Secretary and the Undersecretary know that. They've acknowledged that to us, and the Undersecretary spoke today about probably low-hanging fruit integration kinds of projects that probably could be done for a relatively small amount of money. But when we get to service expansion, double tracking, et cetera, the dollars add up. It costs between $2.5 and $3.5 million to buy a light rail car, one car, or a commuter rail car. It costs $50 million to build about a mile of rail transit, depending on the right-of-way costs. So ultimately, we would love to see dollars, more dollars in this program. To the degree the Department of Finance projection of cap-and-trade revenue next year we think is conservative. We're hoping you would be able to find a way to add more dollars without taking from any other of the programs the governor has proposed. But we do want to support the governor for coming out and acknowledging the need to invest more in rail transit. And the Undersecretary also mentioned Prop 1B, the transit capital piece. It comes up under your item number 15, but because you mentioned it, I'll just say we wholeheartedly support that proposal. Appreciate the governor, finance, secretary at Transportation Agency, and the department director here proposing to you that you exhaust the remaining appropriation authority for Prop 1B. All our transit agencies, bus and rail, need you to do that so they can plan to complete projects that are currently on the books. Thanks very much.
Thank you. And so we're going to hold open the infrastructure proposal, and if there could be a motion on the direction that staff recommends regarding providing a staffing plan for shelf of projects. It's on page 31.
Got it. Yeah, I would move the staff recommendation under item number 12 related to a report from Caltrans.
Second.
Thank you. Move to a vote.
Bloom?
Aye.
Campos?
Aye.
Gordon?
Aye.
Patterson?
Aye.
Thank you. Now we'll move on to the Secretary of Transportation. We have 3 items to cover, and then after issue number 15, we will hear from the public.
Sure. Brian Annis, again from the Transportation Agency. And issue 13 is an update on the State Smart Transportation Initiative report. This was an external review that the Secretary asked for last year. I'm going to speak a little bit about the origin of the report and then turn it over to Director Doherty to talk about some of the implementation steps underway.
Good, and I should mention we're going to try and finish these items up in under 5 minutes to allow some time for public comment and
Sure.
So that we can adjourn it.
Sure, it's good direction. Well, just briefly, the SSTI report, we saw value in that to follow up on reforms we've done so far because it brought in some external officials from out of state, people that have run DOT in other states, directors, secretaries of transportation in other states. Their recommendations fell in a few broad categories. They recommend the state increase our focus on maintaining our existing infrastructure. They recommend we focus more on operating the existing system, and we think that's fairly consistent with our January budget in terms of the loan repayment priorities you just heard about. They also conclude that Caltrans can and should be a more important player in California in terms of sustainability and sustainable investments. So we look forward to working through all these recommendations, and again, I'll turn it over to Director Doherty to talk about some of the early efforts underway.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Assembly members. I'll just augment that with there were 4 early action items that were represented in the SSTI report, and I'll share very quickly. One of them was for us to revisit our mission and vision to make sure it is more consistent with current state planning and policy goals. We have already collaborated with the Transportation Agency and my executive board to come up with a new mission and vision. I will share that mission with you. The Caltrans mission is to provide a safe, sustainable, integrated, and efficient transportation system to enhance California's economy and livability, and I believe those statements will help drive decision-making going forward. Another early action item was for us to work with the Office of Planning and Research, OPR, on the development of rulemaking for SB 743, and that is an ongoing effort with some of my Caltrans staff, and I meet with leadership over at OPR on a monthly basis to see that progress forward, and as far as I know, the rulemaking process is on schedule to adopt rules by July 1st. A third early recommendation was to work on flexibility in our transportation design guidance, especially as it overlaps with decisions that locals are making. One specific guidance that was referenced was the NACTO Urban Street Design Guide, which is the National Association of City Transportation Organizations, and we are working on that as we speak. And the last was to develop work groups to 8 work groups, and ultimately we formed 8 work groups to address all the remaining SSTI recommendations accordingly, and we have formulated those work groups, and they are underway, and they are co-leads by members of California State Transportation Agency and the Department of Transportation.
Thank you. Nothing from LAO on this. Is that right? Yeah. All right. Let's move on to the next item. We'll be holding issue 13 and 14 open. We do have a recommendation on 15.
So would you like me to address issue number 14, which is capital outlay?
I don't think you need to spend too much time on it since it's going to be coming back to us.
Okay. We did conduct a zero-based budgeting effort on along with the Department of Finance, the Legislative Analyst's Office, and the Department. Based on the review, the administration is proposing recommendations to improve the estimating and accountability of the Caltrans capital outlay support programs, Project Direct workload. We will be implementing these recommendations as well as continuing improvement measures that were underway before the program review began. And there is no budget change as part of this informational BCP. A spring finance letter will be submitted as part of the May revise process.
Thank you. Issue 15.
For item number 15, I'd be more than happy to address any specifics, but there are 6 proposals, and we don't have any concerns over any of those proposals, but we'd be more than willing to discuss any of them individually.
Thank you. Are there any questions about any of the proposals? LAO?
Jessica Peters with the Legislative Analyst's Office. Number 5 on this issue is funding to operate the I-15 express lanes. This is a tolled facility in the San Diego area that has a movable barrier. There's essentially 4 lanes, and the barrier separating the northbound and southbound traffic can be moved in order to accommodate higher commute flows, with 3 lanes going in the direction of the commute traffic and only 1 lane going in the other direction. We don't have an issue with the request for funding and the number of positions that the department has. However, we would recommend that you alter the request to allow Caltrans to get reimbursed from SANDAG from the toll revenues generated on the facility rather than having this paid from the state highway account. State law that set up the authority to collect this toll in this program contemplated that state agencies would be reimbursed, and in recent years SANDAG has collected more than enough revenue from the toll facility to pay for the full costs, and it's just sort of generally good policy on a toll facility to have the toll pay for the operation of the facility first and then have other funds used for other purposes if they're left over.
Mr. Doherty, is that something you need that you can agree to today, or
can I address?
Yeah, please.
Yep. Steve Wells, Department of Finance. I just want to say that the currently the Caltrans operates under a cooperative agreement with SANDAG that allows SANDAG to reimburse them for different operational costs that the state incurs. The agreement has the formula for reimbursement is based upon the proportional usage. At current time, the proportional usage of the non-paying vehicles is about 80%. So at present, they're reimbursing about 20% of the costs. As far as the mobile barrier, were the state not sharing the lanes, there would not be a need to actually move those barriers. They would be able to have traffic flow with just the paying customers by leaving the barrier in the same place. So the movement of the barrier is actually part of the process of the state getting those three high occupancy vehicle lanes in exchange for sharing the lanes with the folks who are paying the costs. So, under the current agreement they are getting reimbursed a proportionate share of the usage.
Well, I just don't know what to make of that.
If I could add, to the extent that right now the barrier isn't being moved and you have two directions of traffic, two lanes of traffic going in each direction, once that barrier is able to be moved, that accommodates these higher traffic volumes, which would allow for both the high occupancy vehicles as well as the toll paying customers. And again, state law contemplates that SANDAG would enter into agreements that provide for the reimbursement. In this case, they have entered into a cooperative agreement with Caltrans, but it only provides for a partial reimbursement. We think, given that there's sufficient toll revenues, that the agreement should potentially be amended, and the legislature should authorize for reimbursement of Caltrans for doing this work to be paid from the toll revenue.
So, I don't think we can resolve this on the spot here. Perhaps we can hold this piece out and ask you to meet and confer and bring it back when the other issues come back. Does that make sense? Right. Is there anything further on this item? Any questions?
Yeah, I would move that the staff recommendation to approve as budgeted and to deal with a placeholder trailer bill to change the active transportation reporting date for CTC, but I would hold open the issue of the I-15 Express land operation.
Thank you. Let's move to a vote.
Bloom?
Aye.
Campos? Aye. Gordon? Aye. Patterson?
Is there any public comment? Seeing none, I thank you all, and we're a couple of minutes late, but I thank you for moving things along. Appreciate it. Meeting's adjourned.